Okay guys, this is over 7B. You should be connecting all these ideas to the ideas of population growth, carrying capacity in relation to transitioning developmental models, especially in regards to industrialization. So that's kind of what we talked about in our warm-up today. So we need to look at how demographic transition follows economic development, right? So this is going to be looking at the affluency. So think about affluency. When you know affluency, you should be thinking money, right? Affluency, money. So what is the effect of having more money per person due to our consumption? What does it do to the environment? Is it a positive thing? Is it a negative thing? So these are questions we're going to have to ask ourselves, positive, negative, right? Okay. Explain how relationships among population size, economic development, and resource consumption influence the environment. So we're going to be connecting the economics, the affluency, the number of individuals, the population, to the impact on the environment. And we're going to describe why sustainable development is common but an elusive goal, right? As we get more money from economic development, we grow our population, we consume more. Sometimes it takes a while for the money that we're making to catch up with our awareness of what we're doing to the environment and the world around us. All right. So demographic transition follows economic development. The theory of demographic transition is a theory that as a country moves towards from a subsistence economy to industrialization and increased influence, it undergoes a predictable shift in population growth. So the countries that you are studying right now and selecting, they all pretty much can be categorized into different types of categories, but generally speaking, we look at them as either developed or developing. Developed is a country with relatively high levels of industrialization and income. We're going to look at the stages of industrialization in just a second. And developing is a country with relatively low levels of industrialization and income. So when you picked your 4 countries, hopefully you picked 1 or 2 that were in this category, maybe 1 in the developed, and then maybe somewhere in the middle. Affluence is the state of having plentiful wealth, including the possession of money, goods, or property. And we are going to look at the effect of affluence, both positive and negative, on the environment. We tend to think of places that have, very high populations. We tend to think of countries that have very high populations as places that are going to have a bigger footprint, right? But places, if you can imagine, that only do like subsistence farming and things of that sort, may not have the ability, the time, or the money to buy things. Right? They can't buy things that we usually do, so they're going to not have such high consumption as we are. Right? So they're not as big consumers. So that's something to kind of. All right. So here's our demographic transition. So phase 1 we talked about earlier. We looked at phase 1. We were talking about pre-industrial. Right? We were looking at the pre-industrial phase. And we did this today. We wrote this out, right? So when we look at the pre-industrial phase, we look at the crude birth rate and the crude death rate, right? And they're pretty similar, right? Since they're pretty similar, we're going to have pretty stable population growth. Population is going to be stable growth, or stable, not really too much growth here, right? And what you should associate with this area is the lack of services. We have a lack of services such as health, sanitation, education, sometimes equity among sexes. Right, so that's something we kind of need to associate with phase 1. Okay, as we get into phase 2, we're transitioning here. We are transitioning to a more industrialized civilization or society. So we're transitioning here. And you can see that the birth rate is remaining about the same, but the death rate is decreasing dramatically. So we are going to have, what do you think is going to happen to our population in this region? Well, if the birth rate's staying the same, we're going to have an increase in the population, and dramatic, right? This is going to be very dramatic. Phase 3, we've got full-on industrialization here. So now we are in the industrial phase of development. Okay, and in the industrial, let's take a look at the let's look at the trends here. We have the birth rate starting to fall and the death rate increasing just a little bit. But what sort of things do you think are going to lead to the death rate increasing and the birth rate falling a bit? What can you think of? Right. We talked about this in the weeks prior, that we have more access to family planning. And from the video that we watched this week, we know that family planning leads to obviously higher life expectancy in the long run, right? We're having lower infant mortality rate because women are having children at a lower rate, and they're also having them later in life. They're having few of them, so they're able to devote more resources to their children, right? And we're having higher death rates because we have higher life expectancy, right? So people are reaching the higher upper 100% of the life expectancy of the human beings, and so they are, dying off a little bit higher rates. Okay, and then phase 4, look what's happening here. We are starting to increase our death rate, and you can see that the total population size up here at the top is going to start decreasing, right? As our birth rate is going to go below the death rate, right? So just kind of look at that there. So hopefully you draw something like this and kind of relate it to resources. You relate it to kind of the public services that you can get. All right, demographic transition. Okay, so again, here we go. Take a look at that. Slow population growth in stage 1 because you have high CDR and CBR. You should probably try to find the similarities between phase 1 and phase 2, phase 3 and phase 4, and also perhaps look at the similarities between phase 1 and phase 4, right? So to kind of think about death rates, right? Think about birth rates. Why is the population going to either be about the same or not grow? Why is it not growing here? Why is it not growing here? Why is it not growing in phase 1? All right, so family planning has a really big part in this. And you can see that in countries that just become culturally aware of family planning and they're allowed to have the conversations about them, we see an increase in the quality of life. We see impacts on the environment. But this is one of the most effective ways that a country can control its growth is through family planning. Usually through really simple things. Some countries we know of, like China, has talked about limiting births. India has talked about sterilization back in the past, and that was met with very, very strong protest, right? So, but family planning through the use of just simple birth control has led to a rapid decrease in birth rates around the world. And you can see the effects of secondary education or higher versus no education. So when there is no education, look at the birth rates for some of these countries. So a place like Ethiopia, right, 6.1 births per thousand versus 2, right? Population size, economic development, and consumption, they all influence the environment. So it's not just the population size, but it's also the ability of that population or per capita to be able to consume resources, right? And so let's look at an that deals with that in just a second. But you can see that resource use in China is massive. So it is in India. But it's, if we look at the United States, even though we are the third most populous country in the world, we really only have about a third of a billion, right? So, but we're going to see that even though we have considerably less than India and China, with 1.3 billion, 1.2 billion, that we have a massive impact on the environment because of our consumption, right? That has to do with our affluency. So let's take that. All right, so over here, some more countries and their ecological footprint. You can see Haiti is in the lower end of the spectrum. These are hectares per capita. Half a hectare per person in Haiti is pretty amazing. You can see that United States is massive in our use, right? The global average for the use in this around the world is somewhere between these two values, right? But you can see that there's a huge disparity between Haiti and the United States. Let me see if I can find the actual value of that. It'll come to me later. I'm kind of trying to remember it. All right, so then this is where we get into the idea of the IPAT equation. It's impact equals population times the affluence of a country times the technology. And it's worth noting that affluence and technology, even though all of these, when you input numbers in these equations, since it is just a product of the three, that you're always going to end up with an increasing value on impact. That's pretty terrible. Increasing value on impact, no matter which one of these you increase, right? So higher technology is going to lead to higher impact. Population influence increasing will also increase the impact. But it's worth noting that the affluence and the technology of a country can sometimes lead to decreases in impact. So think of some ways that having more money could actually decrease your impact, or maybe having higher amounts of technology can lead to decreases in your impact, right? So think about some things that having more money in a country can give you the luxuries of making more ecological decisions, right? Like maybe deciding to buy something that's a little bit more expensive because it's locally grown. And then technology, of course, we can use things like refrigeration chemicals, like CFCs. They can, of course, they can degrade the ozone layer, which is what I was trying to draw there, but they can increase your impact overall, right? But then you can have things like clean technology, green technology, things like hybrid cars, which I'm not trying to just say that because I drive a hybrid. Hybrid cars, solar energy, wind energy, all these things are technology that would end up leading to decreases in impact, right? So it's important to note that technology is kind of a complicated thing. Affluence as well, just being able to, make social decisions with your money that improve the environment. These are things that will lower the impact, right? Choosing to eat a little bit less meat, trying not to buy things that are imported to eat all the time. Those are things that are going to help. Generally speaking, though, we say that a country's affluence and the level of the GDP, the gross domestic product, is a good measure of affluence and the impact, right? So the higher the GDP, usually the higher the impact a country has, right? So that's really worth noting somewhere. The higher the GDP you have, gross domestic product, which factors in government spending, investments in the economy, consumer spending, of course, and then you subtract anything that you import and buy from other countries, so that money's leaving. All those things, though, in some way, they have to use some sort of energy to transport goods and services. So the higher the GDP, usually the higher the consumption of fossil fuels. Right? So that's why we say that the higher the GDP, the higher the impact on the environment. So let's talk about local versus global impacts. So the scale of an impact depends on the nature of the economy and the degree to which society is developed. And this is what I was talking about earlier by buying local, going green, and all those the hippie stuff that everybody kind of makes fun of. But these things factor into the way that we impact the world around us. Highly localized impacts are typical of rural, agriculturally based societies. So we're not just talking about hippie land and Portlandia and stuff like that. We're looking at maybe developing nations that are pre-industrialized, that maybe just live off the land right next to them, and they can have very, very high impact on the local land, right? Like clear cutting forests around them for farming, right? And we know that has all kinds of habitat effects, right? If we get rid of trees, you end up with soil erosion, leaching of nutrients, you name it, right? These are all things that affect the environment, and then they will later on affect the economy, because now we don't have the same level of nutrients in the soil. We don't have the same land. We lose a lot of organisms that maybe were or shade-loving organisms, right? So these are things that happen on a global level, right? Sometimes we don't have a choice. Sometimes because of the amount of money that we already have at the beginning of a situation, we just have to impact globally, right? Or locally, I mean. Okay, global impacts are more common in affluent or urban societies because we can import things. That's really all it is. Urban areas are areas that contain more than 385 people per square kilometer. It's 800 people, or 1,000 people per mile. All right, and so let's look at what urban impacts do. Let's take a look at this graph here. Right now, about 75% of all countries, their populations live in urban areas, right? And you think urban areas are, might have like a negative impact on the environment because, there's all kinds of, emissions that come from cities, there's cars and everything. What you have to understand, though, is that since people are more tightly packed, they're not taking up as much land, right? So the land usage is a little bit lower per capita. And also there's a lot of access to public transportation. So people are not driving around their own cars, aren't having to go as far. They can even walk to work, right? So just little things like that to cut down on consumption that we can think about kind of help. So there is kind of like a plus and minus to living in urban areas. Okay, so let's look at some more data for urban. It's pretty interesting, right? So you think of, you can kind of imagine, you think of these things that, places like Tokyo, going to be really urbanized, really big. Look at the population there. It's bigger than some countries, right? Now, this one's crazy, right? Mexico City, 20 million. That's pretty crazy, right? Sustainable development is a common yet elusive goal. So the ecosystem sustainability will be threatened if human population continues along its current path of resource consumption around the globe. And this is something I kind of want to showcase. There's a little example at the end of the chapter through working towards sustainability. There's some countries that kind of talk about family planning as a measure of reducing the population and kind of looking at ways to live sustainably, right? Like economic growth is really good, right? But to be able to have sustainable growth means that your future populations are going to be able to also benefit from the world around you, right? So we're going to kind of look at ecosystem sustainability meshing and working with economic stability. So you kind of want to link these two together. This is like the new age idea of environmentalism. If you can link ecosystem stability with economic stability and just making sure that there's enough to go around for the future, right? So you want to make sure that there's enough to go around for future generations, right? And this is kind of like a world for our children, a world for our grandchildren sort of thinking, right? So continued alterations to the ecosystem that have improved human well-being. So we have greater access to food, clean water, suitable housing. This means we have to take resources from other places, right? So sometimes we take energy from other places. We use land and resources from other places too. And it's worth noting that the majority of the population in the world is not living with the same conditions that we have by any means, right? We're talking dirt floors, dirty water, no access to health care, education's bad, not have electricity, running water. It's a very, very stark contrast and gap between different countries. And I want to kind of talk about this one city or this one state in India called Kerala, right? And they had the absolute worst, basically data for women and fertility rates and birth rates in all of India. And by worst, I just mean the highest, right? So they had the most, they had the, this is now current, right? So after they had government policies of promoting family planning in this state in India, you can see that their life expectancy has gone way up for women, compared to the life expectancy of women in the rest of India. The infant mortality has gone way, way down. Female literacy rate, they really value education in this state. They we have almost a 90% literacy rate in the entire state. This is versus India. The average number of children per family has gone down to 1.8. Look at that. It's like almost half of what it was in the rest of India. That's crazy. The reason for that is that there are cultural and social reasons for that. Every state in India is allowed to kind of come up with their own ideas for promoting family planning, but because of the fact that Kerala has kind of a matriarchal society, these social changes have been much easier. Matriarchal societies basically mean that like the woman is considered the head of the family unit, and they may not have the power, but they're looked to as the source of continuity, perhaps, right? So they increased healthcare, put up signs like this, one is fun, so population control. They did not go the sterilization route. They're looking much more at making sure that the government is promoting family planning, right? So it's very important that we do things like that. Also, some ladies here getting an education. Education is one of the 3 E's. They went the 3 E's approach. And what the 3 E's are educating women, it is employing women meaningfully and equally, and making sure that they are, what's the last one? Equal. So equality, right? So making sure that women have the same opportunities as men, mean that they can be employed at the same level, they be educated at the same level, and so they will contribute money. They will make decisions that improve the lives of their family. Because we know that we know that women, when they have children, they usually end up being the caretakers, regardless of what the man involved in the situation is. They're usually thought of as being stuck with the kid no matter what, right? So women, for whatever reason, they end up making decisions that we saw from the video that improve the lives of their family and keep money within their community much more. So, just go off of what you learned in the videos, the mother caring for 7 billion, and think about the fact that educating women somehow, not just somehow, but increasing education, these 3 E's here, and increasing access to family planning. These 2 collectively end up somehow, through a series of events, they end up improving the environment. I know it seems almost non-causal, but if you kind of look at the effects that these things have here, it's like a ripple effect that end up leading to improvements in the environment, right? Sustainability. All right, and last but not least, let's take a look at the difference in the population pyramid here. So this is before a lot of those policies the government put in place had. And now this is a projected as of 2026 based on the current population growth model. And it takes a while, right? It takes a while. Just because you change something now, there's still maybe a really high number. So when they made these changes, look at the number of people in the especially the women here. Look at the women that can have children. It's a very, very big number. And so as these shift up, it's gonna take a while for this to start declining. You start seeing there's a little bit of a decline here, right? But it takes a while. This is that population momentum, right? The growth momentum. So I hope you kind of learned and got some context through all these things. And you can relate this to kind of carrying capacity. You can relate this to limiting resources and climates, biomes, all that stuff, the available resources. Thinking about what it takes to change an environment to sustain people, even though it seems like a good thing. Like, so let's say I get like a desert and I make it into farmland. I have to transport all the water and the materials to make it, survivable in that area. So that's going to create an ecological footprint as well. So try as much as possible to make connections to all these things. Try to remember things you watched in videos. These are concrete examples that I've put in front of you to make these vocabulary words mean a little bit more than they would just by reading them. So hopefully you're making connections and taking time to, in your note card, in your packet, to go the extra mile and not just copy things straight out of the textbook, but make connections. Okay.